They begged him to leave. The enemy was coming from every direction. His army was already doomed. He could have escaped. He could have lived. But instead, the king tightened his grip on his spear and chose to die where he stood. This is the story of a man who refused to surrender, even when the battle was already lost. Stay with this story, because what happened next was not bravery. It was defiance, and empires fear defiance more than armies. The night before the final stand was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Fires burned low. Men whispered instead of laughed. Even the wind seemed to move carefully, as if it knew what was coming. Scouts had returned with the truth no one wanted to hear. The enemy was not just advancing, they were surrounding everything. The king listened as his commanders spoke one after another. Each man tried to sound brave, but fear slipped through their words. They talked about numbers. They talked about supplies running thin. They talked about how the narrow pass that once protected them no longer mattered. The advantage was gone. The trap had closed. Then someone finally said what everyone was thinking. There was still a way out. A path through the hills remained open. Not wide enough for an army, but wide enough for a king. If he left before dawn, he could disappear into the mountains. He could regroup. He could survive. No one would call it cowardice. A living king could raise another army. A dead one could not. Others agreed quickly. Allies added their voices. They reminded him of his city, of his family, of the future that would vanish if he stayed. Hope still existed, they said. Not here, but somewhere else. Survival was not surrender. Retreat was wisdom. The king did not answer immediately. He walked among the soldiers instead. He looked at their faces in the firelight. Young men pretending not to be afraid. Old warriors pretending this was not their last night. Some knelt to adjust armor they would never remove again. Some stared into the dark, already imagining the morning. They looked at him when he passed, not with panic, with expectation. They believed he would stay. That was the weight pressing on his chest, not pride. Responsibility. If he fled, many would follow. The line would break. The stand would become a rout. Men who were ready to die with purpose would instead die running. When he returned to the council, the arguments began again, louder now, desperate. They begged him to think like a king, not a warrior, to live for the city rather than die for the ground beneath his feet. He finally spoke. He said escape was possible. Yes. He said hope still existed. Yes. But not here, not now, not for them. He told them that some battles were not meant to be won. They were meant to be held, meant to delay, meant to show something the enemy could never understand. If he left, the story would end quietly. If he stayed, it would burn itself into memory. Silence followed, heavy and final. At dawn, those who could not stay were told to leave. The king did not move. The morning air was crisp, but it carried no relief. Smoke from distant fires drifted lazily across the hills, a quiet reminder that the city behind them was already under siege. The king stood at the edge of the ridge, eyes sweeping the battlefield, calculating. He knew his army was smaller than it had been the night before. Fewer men, fewer shields, fewer voices to echo courage. Word came quickly. One by one, the soldiers who had marched with him in good faith slipped away, melting into the morning mist. Excuses were whispered. Orders were ignored. Loyalty had a limit, and they had reached it. He felt the shift immediately. The line that had once held firm began to thin. Gaps appeared where shields should have clashed. Spears no longer formed a solid barrier. The enemy's advantage grew with every passing second. Encirclement was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty. Messages arrived from scouts, frantic and terse. The army was surrounded on 3 sides. The 4th side led directly to the city. But that city was already aflame, swallowed by the enemy. No retreat remained. No sanctuary waited. The mountain pass that had offered hope the night before was now blocked by enemy patrols. There was no escape, yet the king remained calm, not because he did not feel fear, but because fear was irrelevant now. Survival was no longer a choice. The decision had already been made long before the first ally fled. The king would not abandon his post, not for glory, not for pride, not even for the faint hope of living to fight another day. He turned to his remaining soldiers. Their eyes sought guidance, reassurance, a hint of a plan. He offered none. Instead, he walked among them, inspecting their formations, adjusting shields, nodding silently to those whose faces betrayed exhaustion and dread. His presence was the last thread holding their courage together. As the day wore on, the enemy pressed closer. They had anticipated retreat, expected chaos, and instead found unwavering resistance. Every movement, every spear, every shield strike became a statement. The king's decision was no longer theoretical. It was manifest in the ground beneath their feet, in the cries of defiance echoing across the valley, in the unwavering stance of men who refused to run. And then the first wave hit. The clash was thunderous. The king fought at the front, spear in hand, shield raised, every strike purposeful. He did not shout orders. He did not plead. He simply held his ground, teaching the soldiers around him that surrender was a choice they no longer had. By midday, the enemy encirclement tightened completely. Yet through it all, he saw the faces of his men, some young and terrified, some hardened and resolute. They had chosen him, and he had chosen them. Together, they would make their last stand, even as numbers dwindled, even as hope vanished. The enemy expected despair, yet they found defiance. And the king, the heart of that defiance, did not falter. The battlefield had become a furnace. Smoke choked the air. Flames devoured what remained of the city, and the stench of sweat and iron filled every breath. The king stood in the center of his dwindling force. Every step left an impression on the scorched earth, a testament to defiance. The remaining soldiers moved like shadows, fighting not just for life, but for the choice to stand against inevitable defeat. Allies were gone. Retreat was impossible. Survival was no longer an option. The enemy pressed from every direction, their numbers crushing, their formation perfect, their expectation of surrender absolute. Yet the king did not falter. He had made his decision long before the first enemy appeared. He would not abandon this ground, and he would not abandon the men who stayed with him. The first volley of arrows fell, dark specks against the morning sun. Soldiers screamed. Some fell instantly. Others staggered, holding wounds as though sheer will could keep them alive. The king did not flinch. He lifted his shield, deflected, and advanced. Every strike was a lesson, a statement of principle. His body became weapon and symbol, teaching courage through action rather than command. He turned to those around him. "Hold fast," he said, voice low but steady, carrying above the chaos. "We do not run. We do not flee. We stand. And we fight for what cannot be taken by numbers or fire." His words were truth. Every soldier understood that survival had no value unless earned through choice and sacrifice. By afternoon, the enemy encirclement tightened completely. Men fell beside him, their lifeblood soaking the ground. Each death left a hollow echo. Yet the king pressed forward, spear striking, shield deflecting, body absorbing blows that would have shattered lesser warriors. Pain became irrelevant. Fear became irrelevant. The choice to stand had transformed into clarity. To live for honor was meaningless if it meant abandoning principle. A young soldier collapsed at his feet. The king knelt, lifted him onto his shoulder, and directed him toward a narrow ridge. "Go," he commanded softly. "Live." Remember, the boy's eyes widened. The king was not sending him away for strategy or victory. He was sending him away because some must survive to tell the story, even as others accept the certainty of death. By late afternoon, the final decision crystallized. There remained only this moment, this ground, these men who had chosen him as their anchor. To leave now would betray not just his soldiers, but the essence of defiance itself. Death was no longer a threat. It was a companion, steady and inevitable. The king's grip on his spear was unyielding. Every movement, every strike, was a testament to the choice he had made. To die where he stood, fully aware, fully conscious, fully defiant. There was no turning back. Only the act of standing against impossible odds, of embracing personal sacrifice as the truest measure of leadership. The air was heavy now. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the battlefield, painting everything in shades of gold and blood. The enemy had surrounded them completely. There was no escape, no hope, no retreat. Only the ground beneath their feet, the men who still stood, and the king at the center, unwavering, resolute, unbroken. The final wave came with a roar. Spears, swords, and shields collided. Dust and smoke rose into the sky, choking the light. The king moved like a force of nature, precise and deliberate. Every strike was measured, every step purposeful. He was not fighting for victory. Victory was impossible. He fought for defiance, for principle, for the idea that surrender was never an option. Even when survival demanded it, men fell on every side. Some screamed, some fell silently, some begged for mercy. The king did not flinch. Every loss around him strengthened the resolve of those still standing. They knew why they were here. They knew why they could not run. Death had become certain, but courage had become absolute. Time blurred. Minutes became hours. The king moved, striking, blocking, guiding without words, embodying the essence of leadership in the purest form. His soldiers mirrored his movements, forming a circle, a bulwark against the impossible. Together, they became more than men. They became a statement, a declaration that some truths are not measured by survival, but by unwavering resolve. Then it was over, not in triumph, but in inevitability. The enemy broke through where numbers were overwhelming. The king fell, spear clattering to the ground, shield cracked, his body a testament to the battle fought and the choice made. Silence followed the chaos. Not eerie, not hollow, reverent. The battlefield seemed to pause, as if the earth itself acknowledged the defiance that had burned brighter than fire or steel. The soldiers who survived told the story. Few of them, scattered and broken, yet alive. They carried the weight of what had been witnessed, what had been refused, what had been endured, and even the enemy felt it. They won the battle, but something had slipped through their grasp, a lesson that could not be taken by force, a truth that could not be erased by conquest. The king's stand became legend, not because he survived, not because he commanded armies, but because he had refused to yield. Every stone of the battlefield remembered him. Every survivor whispered his name. Every story that followed carried the echo of his defiance. Empires could erase cities, burn armies, rewrite victories. They could not erase courage, choice, or defiance. The king had shown that some victories are not measured by who lives, but by who refuses to surrender. And so, the empire won the battle, but never erased his defiance. His name was Leonidas. If this story of defiance left you breathless, don't let the courage end here. Subscribe now and witness the untold tales of kings, warriors, and moments that history almost forgot. Hit the bell and join the journey where every choice echoes through time, because some stories aren't just watched, they're lived.